There you go.
Right, so fantastic. So as you can see, everybody, our session is being recorded today. So if you need to pass this on to anyone within your organisation after the session today, you're more than welcome to do so. Okay, so our first presentation will be from Helen Lord of the Vulnerability Registration Service, who's going to start sharing her screen now. I'm the chair for today. My name is Kirsty, but yeah, here's Helen to take over.
So is that
okay?
Worked out the price at 49, or is that matching the macro?
Are we sharing all right, Kirsty?
Yeah, it's sharing. You're all good to go. It's on the screen.
Okay, all right. Afternoon, everybody, and thanks for all attending. I think again it shows how much vulnerability is still a hot topic, and from what I've seen, and I'm talking to lots of people every day, it's coming to the fore more and more, and I can see more things happening and more solutions coming to bear as well. We've got Rob talking. Our last webinar, we asked what was the main barrier in terms of data sharing around vulnerability, and I think 91% of people saw data protection as an issue, and it's this kind of spectre that's cast over us. Can we do things because of data protection? And it's almost can create some paralysis in us moving forward. And it's not, as long as we do things properly. And I think hopefully Rob will clarify some things in a little while. We've also got Cath talking from the illegal money lending team, and I think that's very, very compelling. And I know a lot of people have a big challenge in terms of engaging people, particularly when they're in debt. I think when people are in the situation that Cath's going to talk about, it explains why some of those people engaging with their with organisations isn't perhaps top of the priority list. They've got worse things to worry about, and I think we'll see more and more people in that situation as the fallout from COVID continues to hit, and there's less options for people to go to. There's less high cost short-term options, and that means people are going to fall into illegal money lending. And finally, with Lily, I think debt management is extremely important. Again, the fallout from COVID, I don't think we've started to see the impact. We've had furlough, we've had payment holidays, we've had all sorts of things, and some of those ghosts are going to come back and haunt us, I think. And I think what Lily has to say is really important. So from a VRS perspective, I'm just going to give an update around where we are, what we're doing, some quick thoughts, and then I'll hand over to the others, who I'm sure is why you've signed on. So we are still moving forward, very much trying to build this central hub around data sharing about vulnerable people, stretching across as many sectors as we possibly can. If somebody's vulnerable, we see them as potentially vulnerable to any service provider that they're working with, and many others. And we are building the database, and the sources from which we're building it, we're getting more and more self-registrations from individuals, and we validate them by making sure that we know whether they are the individual living at the address they've provided. Power of attorney, if somebody's got a power of attorney in place, we can register them on the database, and we'll validate that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Court of protection orders, we're working with local authorities, solicitors, estate management companies around getting court of protection orders in place. And again, where I see our database going, it's a unique set of data that highlights circumstances that aren't typically shared. Court of protection order, we work with each individual council to get that information on board, and it really is showing people that are lacking mental capacity to manage their own finances. But anecdotally, we're still seeing scenarios where mobile phone contracts are being taken out, vehicle finance is being taken out, when those individuals really shouldn't be put in that position. And working more and more with charities as well as debt management companies. And again, I'd see this as really unique data. I think what Cath does around illegal money lending, and she'll talk about it, I don't think we see the fallout. We don't see the people in those situations, and we're not always in a position to take that information into consideration. Looking more at financial abuse as well. There's no central way of identifying that. It's very difficult to communicate with the victims. So we are working with charities as a conduit to be able to share that information without putting individuals more at risk. Also working and getting data on board around veterans, around areas such as PTSD and serious indebtedness in that arena as well. So it's broadening out the sources and trying to really highlight where people are vulnerable that we might not typically know. And we're also seeing a lot of people registering on our database are younger individuals, perhaps not built up that credit history yet. They're sort of on the initial path to building up their finances, but certainly mental health is manifesting itself in younger people. And at the other end of the spectrum, older people, they may not be as credit active and they may not be able to communicate their situation as well in some circumstances. And we're trying to build that gap. And then the final way of getting data on board is always working increasingly with organisations that sign up with us to start to use our data to help them identify vulnerability at whatever part of the customer journey that may be appropriate. Now, some of these slides I've used before, but I'm aware we've got a big audience today. I'll just cover them off quickly. When we did a recent survey, 34% of people considered themselves to be vulnerable. And that's not to say that all of those individuals should be registered on a database, highlighted or treated in a different manner, but 34% of people feel that they are in a vulnerable position. And the growth of that is very much in mental health. There's probably various reasons for that. People feel more comfortable with identifying with that, but it's also very close and aligned to when people fall into debt. Another thing shown on here, these are the things that people have been worried about in the last 12 months or so, particularly with the impact of the pandemic. And the figures are high, people showing that they're having missed payments, missed utility bills, taking on further debt, council tax payments being missed credit payments. And I think the most worrying of all is around housing, missed mortgage or rental payments, and the number of people that actually feel at risk of homelessness or eviction. You see it's well over 10% there, and that to me is a very, very frightening figure. So 10% of the population are fearful that they are going to lose their home in some way or form. And this is the experience of people discussing vulnerability. 35% found themselves repeating circumstances to different departments to be difficult. Many people finding themselves passed around to different departments. A lot of people finding it difficult to speak to the right department. But at the same time, there are pockets of really good practice happening. And I think it's testament to the number of you that have joined today. There is concern about this, and that there is a recognition of the need to treat vulnerable people differently. 30% of people feeling they've been treated with empathy, 29% feeling that an organisation acted appropriately and they received the right level of support. But we all talk about whether people are prepared to share the fact that they're in vulnerable situations. 56% of people were saying that they would say if they were asked that they are in a vulnerable situation. And they believe that organisations should put checks in place to identify that vulnerability, and they would share details of vulnerability if it would mean that they would receive better support from organisations. Still a lot of people feeling they've been unfairly treated. A lot of people are saying they've had to spend quite a lot of time trying to communicate their issues. Even things like a relationship breakdown or a bereavement, sometimes taking 6 months to communicate that. Now, it needs immediate action. And the other thing I'll touch on is around power of attorney and carers. 45% of people are saying they need to act on behalf of a vulnerable family member or friend. And I'll just launch in, if you'll indulge me, into a little personal scenario I've had over the last 4 months, whereby I have moved my 89-year-old mother in with me, which basically has meant I've had to cancel numerous direct debits, change of address, and so on. And I think what it's illustrated to me, and I know what I'm doing to a certain extent. I've worked in financial services since I was very young. I'm relatively computer literate, I guess. But the difficulty with actually having to support her, even with a power of attorney in place, has been, quite frankly, a nightmare. Now, she has support. She's got somebody acting on her behalf. She's not suffering from dementia. She's relatively for her age physically fit. A lot of people don't have that support, and it really brought it home to me. If somebody was fending for themselves, trying to go through working with different organisations and cross-sector, I would say, then they would really have a nightmare. So this is just a few figures of talking, and I know Sam Manning's on from Hope Macy, and what they're really doing is trying to build up alternatives to power of attorney and enabling carers to act on an individual's behalf and really give them the support that they need with their Family Connect product. But again, these are interesting quotes. 5.4 million unpaid carers in the UK, and that's from the NHS. So 7 million carers in the UK, and that's expected to increase by 60% in the next 30 years. And people over 85 to reach 1.9 million in the next decade. It's a huge problem, and I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that it's not just the vulnerable people, it's the people that are caring for them, and very often those vulnerable individuals aren't in a position to put their hand up and say, I am in this situation, so they're relying on other people to act on their behalf. So just to finish off then, from my point of view, we are talking to all these different sectors and more on a day-to-day basis. Everybody is grappling with the same problems around supporting vulnerable people with slightly different nuances. But the aim at the end of the day is all the same, and they are the same vulnerable people. If somebody's vulnerable and in debt and they're being chased by collections, it may be that they're working with local government or government around benefits and council tax. They're going to have a mobile phone. They're going to have housing issues. A large proportion of the people that are registering on our database are in social housing. So there's a big chunk of people whose circumstances we really need to take into consideration from that point of view as well. And we're talking to housing associations, housing providers around, you know who your vulnerable customer base are. So let's work with that, because it's going to be relevant in other sectors as well. Utilities, I think, and I know many of you are on today, have moved forward a lot. There is a huge amount of talk about data sharing, particularly around priority service register codes. If somebody is vulnerable in the utilities world, they are potentially vulnerable in the banking world, in the insurance world as well. So that's why I think data sharing shouldn't be localized. It should be broadened out with different requirements in each sector or each different industry. On the right, those are some of the organisations we're very well into already working with. There are many others that we're talking to and gradually building up relationships with, working with Ariga, and we're doing pilots around utilities and data sharing, talking to Thames Water. Picasso, if any of you may have seen it recently, we're working in partnership with Picasso, specifically in the short term, trying to get data out to insurance companies who may not particularly have the same sight of vulnerability in their customers as perhaps other industries because of the immediate interaction, the way quotation works, but it's equally as important to know. So Picasso have integrated VRS into their solutions. It's there for the asking to start to use it. Ariza, similarly, as far as collections are concerned, VRS is accessible through Ariza, through Synectic Solutions. In the public sector world, for local authorities, Ascendant Solutions have our systems, and it's being used out there as part of looking at council tax arrears. You can access VRS and see which customers are vulnerable. And it will highlight the exceptions. We all can have ways of identifying if somebody is seriously in debt. There's affordability models, credit reference agencies. I think what our data does is it puts a layer over and above that, identifying truly vulnerable people. And it might be financial hardship, but it's very often more than financial hardship. It might be aligned with mental health. It may be nothing to do with being in debt. It may be somebody's vulnerable for another reason, and that needs taking into consideration. I've mentioned VCX there, do a lot of great work, and we're working with them around ensuring that customer service teams are are trained. VCX have fantastic online training that they're rolling out, because it's a difficult situation to be dealing with vulnerable people on a repeated basis. So staff need to be trained and being aware. And also, I'm just throwing in Helen there, who have predictive models around looking at vulnerability. So we kind of work with them. We are showing the genuinely vulnerable people after they've sort of shown the potential for people to become vulnerable through a predictive model. So I'll shut up now. Thanks for listening. Thanks again for all for attending, and I'm sure Rob, Lily and Cath will have great messages to give you.
Thanks so much, Helen. I'm really impressed with your timekeeping as well. We're actually keeping to time, which is something that we never do. So well done. So thank you for that, Helen. Did anybody have any questions for Helen at all on any of the information that she's just shared? Please feel free if you want to raise your hand. Oh, yep, Simon Gregory from Data on Demand. You'd like to ask a question to Helen?
Thanks, Kirsty. Hey, Helen.
Hi.
Yeah, I suppose it's probably a fairly obvious one, but some of the stats you talked about in terms of people already stating that they felt in a vulnerable situation, I presume all that's even before the end of furlough kicking in and the universal credit situation as well. So as you said, I think those figures are only likely to increase. Would that be a fair statement?
I think they are, and Simon, yeah, I think you're right. And we did that survey a couple of probably 3 months ago now. So it was before furlough had finished. And my view is very much that we're not going to see the full impact. I'd hark back to say the credit crunch, the recession 2009. I don't think you necessarily saw the impact of that for a few months or a couple of years even later. People have had a bit of a stay of execution, I think, in some cases. So furlough's gone away, payment holidays gone away. We've seen the stuff around universal credit today. So all those things are going to hit home. So I think we need to be prepared for that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Mark, you had a question, Mark Bailey?
Thanks, Kirsty. Hi, Helen.
Hi, Mark.
So in the last 3 months, what's been good? Are there any examples of people doing good stuff? You talked about some of the partnerships, but are there any things we could be learning?
Right. I will answer that question in 2 ways. I think, yes, Mark, I do. I mean, the conversations I'm having are more plentiful than I can probably manage, which is a great thing. I can see a lot of organisations feeling the need to really move forward and change things. However, I think it's quite easy for us to say we care about vulnerable customers and put a tick in the box externally and do a lot of discussion about it. Actually, putting our money where our mouth is I think we've still got a long way to go, but that's life. It takes time. We've got a big amounts of change to happen. And I think the fact, one of those stats there that said 30% of people feel they've been treated empathetically, it was about the same as people thinking they've been treated negatively. So on that basis, I guess we're halfway there.
Lovely, thank you, Helen. Ernest from Citizens Advice, you have a question for Helen?
Yeah, thanks, Helen, for the presentation. So learned a lot. I just wanted to get some clarifications with regards to the data, the percentage.
No, I've lost you.
People responded to areas. I think one of them I could remember is things like 30% said they were shown empathy, for example, by organizations. So is that 30% of those who responded, or 30% of all the responders? Say, for example, the other 70%, did they say that they didn't get empathy, or was it the case that just 30% responded and they all said they got empathy?
No, it's that 30% of people in vulnerable circumstances felt that they were treated with empathy.
Mm-hmm. So okay, so is that does that suggest the other 70% felt otherwise?
Yes, but I don't think we've got a scale of how badly they were treated. I guess you can split it out into 3/3 roughly. Some felt it was positive, some felt it was negative, and I guess the middle bit was a little bit indifferent, as expected.
Right. Okay.
But I mean, anybody who wants to, I have all our survey results. Anybody who's interested, just let me know, and we can share the detail of those surveys, because I think it's interesting reading for anybody dealing with vulnerable customers.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Thanks.
Lovely. Thank you so much. We've probably got time for one more question for Helen. If anybody had any more questions that they wanted to send across. Any virtual hands? No? Going, gone. Right, okay. No worries at all. We'll just we'll crack on with the rest of the presentation. And Helen, thank you so much.
Okay, I'm seeing people saying they want some of the survey results. So we'll share. I've got slides on them, so we'll share some of those when we share the presentation.
Lovely. Thank you so much. That's great. Okay, so Rob, of RB Compliance, are you ready to crack on with your presentation?
Absolutely, absolutely. I shall just share my screen.
Thank you.
And hopefully everybody can see the presentation now. So thanks for the opportunity to speak for a few minutes around the fun topic that is GDPR, everyone's favorite topic, but it is actually hugely important for this environment, and I think particularly where we think of the powerful personal example that Helen shared with us just before there. I think we're probably all very familiar with that type of situation where there is somebody who we're needing to help and process their data, and the power of the data is absolutely key in those situations. But what we come across from time to time is the fact that organizations feel that GDPR is a barrier to the use of that data. It stops us from processing it and using it the way we need to help the individuals. So we're gonna debunk some of those myths today, and work through when we can process the data and when we can't in a little bit more detail than perhaps the majority of the industry understands. So that's what this section is all about. So as mentioned, my name's Rob Bell, and I have a compliance consultancy company. My background is very much in law originally, and then financial services compliance. So all things FCA and GDPR. One of the things I've recently done is written the guidance that on behalf of Money Advice Trust and MALG on vulnerability, GDPR and disclosure, alongside Chris Fitch and Colin Trent, which a lot of this is focused on. So the question we all ask ourselves is how should I process vulnerability data? Can I process it? What should I do with it? And to answer that question, you need to look through 3 different lenses. And the first one that you might want to focus on, and probably the most important, is that vulnerability lens. So we have a vulnerable customer, and we need to think about what data we need to process in order to help support that individual. And that, do we need the data? Is it necessary? And what will we use it for? And remember, with GDPR, if it's not necessary to process it, then at that stage we don't process it. But if it is necessary, then you want to find a legal basis to process that data, and that's where we come on to the second lens, which is the data lens. So what data do you need to process? Why is it needed? And is it fair and legal? In other words, you have to have a basis under Article 6 of GDPR, or UK GDPR as it is now, of Article 6 to process the data. If it's standard personal data, if it's special category data, you need a basis under Article 6 and Article 9. And that's kind of the second hurdle. So the first hurdle being, do we need the data? The second hurdle is it special category data? And that's the next question to ask yourself, because often data around vulnerability isn't. So the person might be vulnerable because they suffered a recent bereavement. That's not special category data. Or it might be a life event like a financial issue or a redundancy, something to do with their work. That's not special category data either. So it's easier to process that data because you just need to find an Article 6 basis, which we'll come on to in a moment or two, and you don't also need that extra special category basis. So that's the second hurdle you need to think of in terms of, is it special category data? If it is, then you're looking for that Article 6 and Article 9 basis for processing. And then the third lens we need to look at is the operational lens and making it work in the real world, making it work with frontline agents. How will it practically work? Because often when we apply both the vulnerability lens and the data lens, the ideal solution is something that would frontline agents kind of make a judgment or decision before they decide whether to go down the route of explicit consent or maybe fall back on one of the other reasons you can process data under Article 9. Whereas I think we know in a real world, that's very difficult to operationalize and skill up people to that level. So that has to be the third consideration in terms of what you can actually do in the real world. But before we look at the data lens, which is the data lens we're really going to focus on today, one thing I do want to mention with the vulnerability lens is the difference in the data that you might record. We often are used to recording what the vulnerability is, and I refer to that as what the cause of the vulnerability is. So it might be mental health condition, it might be a physical health condition, or it might be, as I mentioned before, bereavement. But what's really important is the effect of the vulnerability and making sure we're recording that data as well. Because if you think about it from a firm perspective, how often can we help with the cause? We can't help with the bereavement. How often can we help with say, a mental health condition? Probably not that often. Whereas we can often help with the cause. So the cause might be financial difficulties, so therefore a payment break, or difficulties communicating with us in the short term, needing a break for it from communication. So just keeping that in mind, that the data we want to think about when we're looking at the vulnerability lens is the effect of the vulnerability as well as the cause, because that does give us good contextual information, but the effect is hugely important to also record as well. But let's look at that data lens and have a brief look at when we can record data. So I mentioned before, under Article 6, we need a basis for processing, whether that's special category data or not. And there on the screen, you can see the main basis of processing that data. And in our world, in the financial services world, the one we would use the most is contract, which is you need the data for the performance of a contract, like a credit agreement, a mortgage agreement, whatever it might be. That's the vast majority of data that we handle. From time to time, there'll also be legal obligations, so data that we record because of money laundering requirements or requirements from the FCA under the Financial Services and Markets Act. That would fall under legal obligation. Occasionally vital interests if it's to keep somebody alive. But the other one that we might focus on is legitimate interest. And certainly when we think about vulnerable customer data, there's quite a lot of guidance to say that you can rely upon legitimate interests, because that's when you're doing the balancing decision between the rights and freedoms of the data subject versus the reason that you want to process the data, and you know, pretty much any balancing decision in our world, we're processing it for the benefit of the customer. So it's a pretty clear outcome on legitimate interests for us. If the vulnerability data is special category data, we need an Article 6 basis, perhaps legitimate interests, but we also need an Article 9 basis. And this is where most of the industry then think explicit consent. And we need somebody's explicit consent to record their health data, for example. explicit consent is one of the basis for processing, but there are many others, as you can see on the screen. If it's already made public, for example, again, if it's in their vital interest, if it's needed for a legal claim, then you can process the data. And then you've got this kind of interesting one at the bottom, substantial public interest. And at first you think, that one, will that really apply to us? Does it sound, would we have any public interest in processing anyone's data? Well, when you then look into it, because essentially what GDPR did is it said each member state, of course we're in the EU at the time, each member state can decide what it views as the substantial public interest. So then you look at the Data Protection Act 2018. In there, our government decided that processing health data to ensure the economic well-being of an individual who is at economic risk, you can process that data under substantial public interest. So that's really quite interesting. So we don't need explicit consent to process customer data about their health if it's to safeguard their economic well-being, so long as it meets the 3 criteria that's built into this section of the Data Protection Act 2018. And essentially the conditions are that it's necessary for the purpose that we're wanting to process it for. So you need to record the data in order to help them. It's data concerning health, and you either can't get consent, so it's impossible to get consent. In the circumstances, it would be unreasonable to obtain consent, or the processing must be carried out without consent of the data subject, because obtaining the consent would prejudice the provision of the support that we're trying to give. So when you look at it in the round, when you look at it in that situation, there are many situations where actually, you know, we could perhaps process data where we're not at the moment. And of course, within that, that means we can pass it on to services like VRS or wherever, using this economic well-being exemption to help the individuals out, rather than always having to rely on explicit consent. And that's essentially what this slide is saying. So we can process the data where customers can't give consent, where it's unreasonable for them to obtain consent, or gaining the consent would prejudice the economic well-being of the customer. An important consideration, though, when we come and think about this operational lens, is that where you try to get consent first and the customer refuses, you can't then switch to economic well-being. You can't ignore their refusal, which is why I say operationalizing it can be a little bit more difficult, because you basically, in some situations, you could be asking your agents to decide, is it likely that someone would consent or not, and then decide before asking which route you want to go down. That's something I think for your organizations to think about, and think about how best you could practically follow these rules. But one situation, for example, that certainly works for are things like third-party disclosures. You know, that stat that we had in Helen's presentation, that 45% of people have dealt with a company on behalf of a family member. Now, of course, power of attorneys or third-party authorization is the best method in those situations. But where you can't get that, under economic well-being, you can still process the data, even if it's special category data. So an unauthorized third party contacts you, you can process that data. You could share it with other organizations that you need to share it with under this economic well-being element of the Data Protection Act. And I think that's really worth bearing in mind, that there's some solid specific circumstances that this can apply to. So there's a kind of whistle-stop tour, if you like, of that exemption of when you can process the data. Of course, there's more detail in the guide that I mentioned before, but that gives you the kind of highlight of it, which I hope is helpful. And a lot of firms are still focusing a lot on explicit consent, rather than also in some situations realizing that you can process the data under this economic well-being, which is quite similar to the best interests theory or reasons that you hear stated from time to time. You then need to, of course, think about using the data, and that's the element around cause and effect that I mentioned before, because too many firms focus on recording the cause. Let's think about recording the effect as well, and that includes what the customer is vulnerable to. It could be mis-selling, financial shock, lack of access to financial products, etc. That's the level of information that certainly we can record, and you'll do that, of course, in a mix of tools that you might use to record the information, whether that's flags, status codes, and account notes as well, before assessing what we can do to support the individual. And with support, you tend to have things that are outside your control, things that you can't help with, and that's where signposting or services like VRS can be really useful to spread that information where you need to. And you might have things that you can assist with as well, financial difficulties, for example, in respect of whatever product you might have with your own firm. So that's the important step around using the data. What have we learned? There's three lenses to look at: the vulnerability, the data, and the operational. We need Article 6 and 9 to process the data, but under Article 9 there is more than explicit consent. There's economic well-being as well, and then of course we always need to think about what we can do when we're using the data to help it pass, to help give the best effect, if you like, for the customer. So there is my presentation, nice and quick for everyone today. So I guess it's a little bit of time for questions and answers, if there are any.
Lovely, thank you so much, Rob. Kate Mitchell was very kindly giving us a link which gives us useful information on data sharing from the ICO's website. We've had a question come in from Susan Smith regarding examples of when you can obtain consent for economic well-being. Susan, did you want to go into a little bit more detail with Rob as to what your question is? You can hear me?
No. So so was the question an example of when you could use economic well-being? Is that?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got to separate consent and separate economic well-being. So if we go down consent, and for health data, it's explicit consent, just like we do now. Texas tends to be the protocol that we might use. Separate economic well-being from that. In that situation, you're not trying to get consent. You are just simply processing the data because it's the best thing for the customer. And the situations where that would be perhaps you're in conversation with a customer, and it's clear from the conversation that they are not understanding the situation, that they are so vulnerable that they can't communicate with you, or they're not understanding when you say what you would do with the data. Where it's clear that situation is occurring, then you could just process the data without attempting to get consent. So there would be one example that would certainly fit within. The second example would be the unauthorized third party that I mentioned before.
Lovely, thanks so much, Rob. There's another question from Mark Bailey. So does GDPR go far enough to allow for data sharing to support customers with extra needs, or does it need more?
Good question. It's a good question, isn't it? I think those issues are getting ironed out over time, because the initial reading I think we all had with GDPR is that it did prevent quite a lot of it. That was our initial reaction to it. But I think as we're all learning a bit more, and the ISOs releasing more guidance, and we're becoming more comfortable with it, it doesn't cause as much of a barrier as we used to think. So it does allow data sharing with third-party organizations where it's for the benefit of the data subject. And I know we obviously in writing our guidance had a lot of conversation with the Information Commissioner's Office and conversation with the FCA as well. And their view is very much a principles-based outcomes approach of, are you doing something to help the customer, and are you doing it in their best interests? And if you are, then you're pretty okay with sharing it.
Lovely, thank you. There's a comment from Helen Mullen. Debt and mental health forms cover some aspects of the effects on the clients. How will these fit in with the vulnerability register and data protection? Oh, it was a question, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a question for me as such, to be honest.
I think it's more for Helen, really, yeah.
Yeah, it feels like it's more of a VRS, but from a data protection point of view, if the customer or their representatives filling it out, then and sending it across to you, they're aware, it's transparent what you're going to do with the data, then there shouldn't be a barrier from a data protection point of view.
Yeah, we probably need to look into have a more in-depth conversation about it, Helen. It'd be good to do that anyway.
Great. Okay, so Jenny Jackson from TransUnion said, this is very useful information, Rob. How do we get access to the paper on GDPR and vulnerability that you referenced in the presentation? Yeah,
it's on Money Advice Trust website, available on there, available on the MALG website in their briefing notes section. So I always just get on with a quick Google search of the title of it. I'll go back a few slides. Vulnerability, GDPR and disclosure. There's a copy of it in the bottom right corner, and it's there. It's pretty lengthy, so I apologize for that. It grew arms and legs as we wrote it. So yes, but that is there and available. That should give you confidence for sharing it.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
So there's another one from Helen Mullen. So the biggest user of these consents are local authorities and government agencies. Are they on board with general processing in your experience?
Are they on board with general process? If I'm honest, I don't quite understand the question.
I think, can I help a little bit? I think I mean, what we're finding working with local authorities and government agencies, we are having to do it like one local authority at a time and work with them. So I think we're getting there. There's a lot of appetite around data sharing. It isn't simple for them. There's a lot of hoops to jump through, but I think we are certainly getting there with that data sharing, and yes, gradually understanding when data can be shared and when it can't be.
Thanks, Helen, appreciate that. There's another message from Steph saying, as a water company, we have tried to set up data agreements with local authorities for affordability reasons, and most are reluctant. Any tips on getting them on board, not using GDPR as a reason not to?
Oh yeah, I totally understand Steph's point of view there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, been in my life as well, to be honest, this type of thing. Exactly. There's no reason that, especially when you're talking there, you're talking about affordability data. So in the round, it's not even special category data. They've just got to understand that there are bases for processing. Legitimate interest in this case would fit really, really well. So the data can be processed, but getting that message through seems to be really, really difficult to organizations, and that's been my life for the last couple of years in terms of banging the drum on that message. So yeah, if anyone finds a way, please let me know as well. I think it's the message there, other than we all keep repeating the message of, as long as we're transparent with customers, as long as we're doing it for their best interest and we'll have a legal basis, then we can share the data. But yeah.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So further comments from Helen Mullen saying, when we ask for details of a client, they always ask for consent forms and explicit consent, which creates barriers, which obviously we appreciate as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does. Depend on your process. Sometimes the process of getting explicit consent can be difficult, and then ends up with the customer not getting the help that they need. This is where economic well-being could step in, because if you've tried maybe to get consent and you didn't get a response, so there was silent back, they didn't fill in the form or whatever, then you've taken a reasonable step, and you could then fall under the category of it's unreasonable to try again. So therefore, you can use economic well-being. So that's a good example.
Yeah. Another comment from Len from Changing Lives, just reiterating what we were saying. Really, local authorities are usually all reluctant. If you get one, the others can follow on, but it is very hard. I mean, we appreciate that more than, well, as everyone else does at the VRS. Trying to get local authorities to provide us with their vulnerable client data, it can be a bit of a mission. But once you get past that point, they can sort of see the benefits of it. Getting past all the GDPR concerns and writing out the documents and answering any questions their InfoGov teams have, then they tend to sort of see the benefits of it. But it is possible.
Definitely. I think the ICO has an open consultation at the moment about the first steps to move away from the EU version of GDPR and create a kind of more bespoke UK version. And one of the biggest things that they're proposing in that is that the ICO becomes more like the FCA, more like an outcomes-based approach regulator rather than a rule-based tick box approach to data handling. So that in theory will help with all of this. And hopefully that will then help the data protection officers in local authorities, etc., get that message across that data can be shared as long as it's for the right outcomes. So hopefully that will help.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Heidi's very kindly included the link to the vulnerability guide in the chat for anybody that wants to have a look at that.
Brilliant.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Rob. We'll move on now to Cath Wohlers, but again, thank you so much for a brilliant presentation, Rob. And as you can see, a very engaged audience that are very interested in asking you questions.
Fantastic. No, thank you very much. Thanks for listening, everyone.
No worries at all. Thank you. Lots of thank yous to you as well, Rob, in the chat. All right, Cath, are you ready to go?
Certainly am.
Fabulous. I'd like to introduce you all to Cath Wohlers, the LIAISE manager for a legal money lending team.
Thank you, Kirsty. You know you're having a heavy afternoon when data protection is followed by loan sharks, don't you? But
it's an interesting day.
Yeah, we'll try and keep it light as much as these things can. So thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Cath Wohlers. I'm the LIAISE manager of the England Illegal Money Lending Team. I'm aware I've recently presented to MALG and also Money Advice Trust meetings. I have changed slides as much as I can to make sure I'm doing something slightly different to not repeat myself and bore people to death. But the message is always very much the same from us. But hopefully there'll be something of interest, even if people have seen us speak relatively recently. As a very quick sort of introduction to the illegal money lending teams, there is a team in England, there's one in Scotland, there's also one in Wales, there is an emerging presence in Northern Ireland. We are criminal investigation trading standards teams set up to investigate and prosecute loan sharks. Started in 2004 as pilots in Birmingham and Glasgow, went regional 2008, national 2011. So I work for one of those dreaded things that is a local authority. I work for Birmingham City Council. But we're not independent. We are linked to Birmingham City Council, but we're a national organisation, and we are funded through a levy on the consumer credit industry via the Treasury. As I say, we live to prosecute loan sharks. We are primarily a criminal investigation team, and a loan shark, the legal definition, is someone who lends money without authorisation from the Financial Conduct Authority. That's the criminal offence they commit. It's not about the interest they're charging or any threatening they're doing. It's the lack of authorisation from the FCA. That is a criminal offence which has a sentence of up to 2 years in prison and or a fine of £5,000. But as a unit, we prosecute for every offence that we find. So we've prosecuted people for rape, for affray, for assault, for firearms, for drugs, for money laundering and for blackmail. Because what we want to do is show the courts the entirety of the criminality and the impact it has on communities to make sure sentencing is appropriate. As well as having an enforcement side, I manage the other half of the team, if you like, who do all the victim support, witness support, awareness raising, and also prevention work, trying to stop people using loan sharks in the first place. A lot of our awareness raising is around training, partner agencies. Very rarely does someone walk into a police station or a housing association or speak to a creditor over the phone and say, help, I'm the victim of a loan shark. It's about us trying to provide people with the tools to draw that out from people, from clients, and also then what to do with that information, where you pass it on to, and what it would look like next. Loan sharks, when I started in this job, I had a picture in my head of Phil Mitchell. I had a big balding Cockney geezer with an army of lads behind him with baseball bats threatening to kneecap people. I'm yet to find him. I've been doing the job for 13 years. So I always tell people there's a breadth of illegal lending, and it's probably broader than you think. So 1 in 5 of the people we arrested last year were women, lady loan sharks. Last week, we arrested somebody who was 76. So it can literally be anybody who is an illegal lender. The most standard MO that we see is a friend or a friend of a friend. So it is about someone having an overheard conversation on the school playground, at work, in the pub. Oh, my car's broken down. I'm absolutely knackered for work. What can I do? That's okay. I'll lend you the money. We've all been there. It's rotten. I hear you. It's no bother whatsoever. 66% of the people we helped last year believed they were borrowing from a friend at the time at which they took out the loan. And I think this is where vulnerability comes into it, because you could say there's a crossover there, heavy crossover with financial abuse. And also we see links to things like cuckooing and county lines as well. But I think that friend element, the idea of a mate, is where a lot of it starts. So we can go around saying don't use loan sharks as much as we want, but fundamentally two-thirds of the people we're trying to get that message to aren't choosing to use a loan shark. They're choosing to borrow from a friend. A lot of loan sharks will tell you they will charge you double bubble. You borrow £100, you pay back £200. They will, however, then charge indiscriminate fees, and it will go up and up and up. We always calculate the APR when we go to court because it's a good press headline, to be brutally honest, and we can evidence 13,500% APR that a loan shark was charging. The Welsh team say they can do 4 million% APR. Not that we're in competition. We do get loan sharks who are linked to organised crime, possibly less than you think, but where the money that is made is laundered back into the community and it's almost used to clean it. So we do see links to organised crime, but most loan sharks have a book of between 30 and 80 people, very much localised lending. Often, even if they are not part of an ECG, they will claim to be. They will have the elusive Mr. Big behind them who is there threatening you. So instead of me lending you the money, I'm your mate, I'm trying to help you out. But if you don't pay me, I won't be able to keep them away from the door forever, you know. They use coercive control to help to make sure people carry on paying them no matter what, threatening to tell people's partners about loans or children, or threatening to tell work that you've got your hand in the till because you owe money. We are now seeing lenders who don't even meet their borrowers, who operate entirely over the internet and through online banking. And we also have an issue with parallel lending, which is where people borrow from a legitimate company, but then it is mirrored in a way by that person lending the money out their pocket. So I'm borrowing from Cath Wohlers PLC, who are completely legitimate, have an authorization from the FCA, but one of their collectors, once I've exhausted my credit rating with Cath Wohlers PLC, will lend me money out of their own pocket. And that second loan is parallel lending. That's illegal. They're not authorized to do that, and that's independently of the company. Very, very hard to detect, often only detected by debt advice agencies at the point at which they are contacting Cath Wohlers PLC and asking about this loan. We're here with Mrs. Smith and she owes you £520, and Cath Wohlers PLC says, no, she doesn't, she only owes me 100. And they work out where that disparity has come from. As well as a breadth of loan sharks, we have a breadth of victims. And this, I guess, is the cautionary tale, because this is what can happen if GDPR doesn't go well, if people don't share data, and if victims are left isolated, even if they are in contact with many, many organisations along the way. So 3 very quick stories. Mark was a guy in London who worked on a market and he needed £2,000, and his friend on the market offered to rent him £2,000. So he had to pay £200 a month rent on that £2,000. The £2,000 was not going down. The capital amount was not being repaid, but the £200 a month rent would continue until the full £2,000 could be paid back. Mark missed the payment 1 month. He told him he was going to. He said he could pay it back in full the next month. No good. It doubled. You know, only £400 a month rent on that money. The £400 a month continual rent on that money meant Mark missed another payment. So then it became £800 a month, and on it went. Mark was actually a migrant worker, and his family in a different part of the world were threatened by the loan sharks family and ended up selling a property to try and pay this debt off in the UK. Eventually, Mark was ostracised by his community. The lender was saying, this guy's a bad debtor. He's bringing shame on our community, and no one spoke to him for ages. Eventually, he actually contacted us. The loan shark was arrested and removed, and the community saw the loan shark was the baddie and not Mark, and he was fully embraced back into that sector and that society. But in the meantime, he'd really gone through it. He was absolutely devastated that it was affecting his family back home. He was appalled that his children were being ostracised at school. And at the end of the day, he paid back, we've worked out, £18,000 towards that £2,000 that the guy still said that he owed. Matthew was a chap in Leeds who borrowed £20 off a loan shark to buy food. He wanted 50, but the loan shark said 20 as a test to check that Matthew paid it back. Owed him 40. So he paid him back 40. The next week he wanted to borrow the 50, so he did, pay back the 100. Every time he borrowed money, it left him in worse debt because he was paying back double every single time. And it escalated and it escalated and it escalated until he was told he owed £6,000. His children were being followed home from school, yelling at. The loan shark was threatening to put his windows in. And Matthew sat one night with our phone number in one hand and some pills in the other hand, and he decided it was one or the other. Luckily, he called us. Loan shark was arrested and prosecuted. Matthew is now a whole different person than the one we first met, completely confident, working again, and looking forward to a happy life with his children and his wife. The reason I raised Matthew's story is 4 days before his near attempted suicide, Matthew had gone to seek debt advice. And he'd also spoken to some of his creditors, his legitimate creditors. And we asked him, had he told any of them about the loan shark? And he told us no. And when we said, why not, expecting him to say, I'm too scared, I was too embarrassed, it's just too awful, he said, they didn't ask. That was the reason. So when I said to him, well, would you have told them if they'd asked? He said, yeah, by that point, I would have told them if they'd asked, but they didn't. We have a stat that 40% of the people we support have been to debt advice. And of those 40%, a certain number have told the debt advisor about the loan shark. When we ask the people who don't, why didn't you tell the debt advisor? Again, the common theme is because they didn't ask. And this, I think, is where we link into GDPR. We're quite lucky in a way in that we don't have, well, not that we don't have to abide by GDPR, of course we do, but we have a bit of a get out of jail free card in that this is criminal activity, which trumps GDPR. But for us to get the information, people still have to ask the question, be it a creditor, an advisor, a utility company, anyone that someone is in debt to. If you ask the question, more people will tell you about illegal activity like loan sharking, and then we can help them. Paula actually met her loan shark on Tinder. She wasn't looking for a loan, she was looking for a boyfriend. And this chap was talking to her. He seemed very plausible, very friendly. They were chatting away for ages. And then one day she said, do you know what? I'm so sick of being skint. And he said, I've got a mate who lends people money. Do you want to link you up with him? Oh, no, it's all right. It's fine. It's fine. But then she did. There was no mate. It was the loan shark who she'd met and who she thought was the potential boyfriend. But she believed for some time there was a mate. And what the guy in the middle, her potential boyfriend, did was he kept saying, look, I've linked you up with my mate here. I did you a favor. You know, you want to be with me. We need to be able to trust each other, and you've got to keep paying him. And when she couldn't, he got really nasty. And he said his final kind of threat or suggestion was that he'd send men round to her house while the kids were in school. She could sort them out, and that the money that she would have been paid for that would come off her loan. And he almost forced her into prostitution because of a loan that she didn't really want in the first place, but she took because she'd been talking to him and it seemed like a good idea at the time. This was our most recent prosecution. This is a guy called Mavunga, operating in Doncaster. He was a business student at Sheffield Hallam University, 23 years old, lent money to some mates, realised he could make a quick buck, so went a bit wider, advertised on Snapchat and paid an influencer to advertise his loans. Didn't meet any of his victims. He asked them for photos of their ID, benefit entitlement or income, and slightly sinisterly their front door. He also used Snapchat to threaten the victims, showing them that he was near to their house. He charged 100%, but you had to pay him back within a month. So you borrowed £200 on the first of the month, you owed £400 on the 31st of the month. Most people couldn't afford to pay that, so then it'd roll over to the next month, and he'd say that £400 was a loan for the next month, so then they owed £800 without actually having been given any more cash than the original amount they took out. We had a girl in London who was slapped twice in the face, she believes, by an associate of Mavunga, and a victim in Berkshire who had threats to burn his house down. Mavunga got 16 months imprisonment, which sometimes people don't like. They think he should have got more. What I would say, he was only charged with illegal lending, so that was all we could evidence. 24 months maximum sentence. He got 25% off because he pleaded guilty, and a 2-month discount for COVID, because that's what they were doing at the time to try and keep people out of prison. However, the judge in this case said very clearly that she wanted to give him more, and she thought he should have had more, and we've taken that back to government now to see what we can do. It's the first time we've actually had a judge say that she wanted to sentence a loan shark for longer. which can only be a positive thing in my perspective. So in terms of COVID, who are the victims? Before COVID, we had hit 20% of people who we supported were homeowners. So when I started, I was very much thinking single mum on benefits, social housing, not the case. 20% homeowners and over 50% in employment, the vast majority of those in full-time employment. This is not an underclass problem. This is not a lower class problem. This is an anybody problem. I've supported people who've earned over 40 grand a year who've been the victim of a loan shark. The average victim we've worked out takes nearly 3 years to report a loan shark. So we don't actually know the impact of COVID yet because it wasn't 3 years ago. Feels like it's been going on for 3 years, but it wasn't. So we don't know that yet, and we're not going to know the impact. And part of that 3 years, I think, is the realization that this is a loan shark and then what to do about it. Loan sharks themselves polarized during COVID, with some of them becoming more aggressive and some of them actually giving people a break. But they definitely moved online. We've seen evidence of illegal lending on Craigslist, Reddit, Facebook, WhatsApp, Snapchat, as I mentioned. And we reckon now it's about 1 in 10 is online. Not with sort of shiny websites or anything, very much social media. A lot of them operate with bank transfer as well. So when we're talking to things like creditors or debt advisors or anyone who's looking at income expenditure, then we've got things that we can give you to look out for to see if you can spot illegal lending. We had a lady the other day who walked into a domestic violence charity in the Northwest and she wanted a grant. She was fleeing an abusive relationship. They looked at her bank statements. They had to for the last month before they could actually put her forward for this grant. And they spotted lots of third-party transactions coming into her bank account. They thought she was a loan shark. They sent it to us. We looked at it. We said it looked like illegal lending to us. So they challenged her on it. And it turned out she was the victim of a loan shark. And he was making her use her bank account to put the money through so that if we ever did a warrant against him, it wouldn't be showing there on his paperwork, on his bank accounts. So that was how she was identified, by someone looking at her bank statements. And with more and more people using open banking to judge affordability, we're hoping this is something we can roll out in terms of training to get people spotting it. I say we're not just an enforcement agency to put people's minds at rest. When people come to us, we put the victim first and their safety first. We will not take a prosecution forward if it puts the victim in jeopardy. And in 13 years of doing this job, we've never had anything bad happen to anyone who has reported a loan shark. Bad things happen when people don't report loan sharks, not when they do. The biggest thing for us is we have the power to remove the lender from a community, but it doesn't matter whether or not you report, in inverted commas, whether you come on the record with us and give us a statement, we will support you no matter what. And there are, like I say, we've never had repercussions against anyone that's come forward. We look at the victim holistically. We'll look at their entire situation, which is again where we link in with the VRS service, because we'll look at, have they got other debts? Have they got gambling problems? Have they got addiction problems? What's their housing situation? Who do they owe money to? Do they owe water? Do they owe council tax? Do they owe rent or mortgage arrears? How can we work together to make sure they are supported so that now they have more money because the loan shark has been removed and they're no longer paying him or her? We can actually look at working with creditors to make sure that that is effectively paid back and nothing is put in jeopardy in terms of their tenancy or anything else. During COVID, we've moved a lot of our services online. We have a brilliant piece of interactive theatre called Shark. I'll put the link in the chat at the end. It's 25 minutes long and it puts you in the position of a loan shark victim. It makes, you have to make the choices. So you watch a scene of the film and then you click a button to decide what happens next. And the story will take you several different which ways depending on what you decide to do. It was aimed at university students following on from the Snapchat case I mentioned. But it's about a guy called Liam who borrows £120 to pay his mate back because his mate took a mobile phone contract out in his name for him. He borrows it from someone he met online, a female, someone his mate recommended, and then you see how quickly it spirals out of control, how easy it is to fall into the grasp of a loan shark, and what happens if you don't access help and support. If anyone has teenage children, I highly recommend it. We say not for under 14 because it is a bit dark at times, but my 70-odd-year-old parents watched it and had a massive row about one of the choices. So it does apply to any age, and it's good to know my job is promoting marital harmony in my parents' home as ever. We offer a lot of free training, speaking now particularly to any creditors on the call. We are starting to move to work with your sector, and we believe that you will have contact with loan shark victims. It makes absolute sense because if you're in debt to a loan shark, you will pay them before you pay anything else because of the coercive control, the threats, the manipulation. So loan shark victims, by definition, have other debts. Quite often those debts have got to the stage of CCJ as well. We will offer training on what is a loan shark, about how to report one, barriers to engagement. We've done it this week with a firm of solicitors in Reading who do a lot of debt collection. It went down really, really well. Totally free of charge. We don't ask for anything at all, just bums on seats and people listening and engaging and asking us lots of questions. And it may be that someone on that call won't come across the victim of a loan shark for 5 months, 10 months, 2 years. All we want them to remember is that we exist, support is available, and to signpost us on. We've also changed our language during COVID. We talk about accessing specialist support because we're so much more than an enforcement team. We've introduced live chat on our website. If loan sharks are going online, it sort of makes sense that we go online too. We're looking at online banking as a data source for intelligence, and lots of social media campaigns as well. In terms of prevent, we work very, very well with credit unions across England, looking at trying to get people saving and then borrowing affordably so that they don't have any problems in the future. That was a very whistle-stop tour of the illegal money lending team. That is my email address. If anyone would like to book training, please do take it down. I'll put it in the chat as well after the slides have gone. We're happy to tailor it to your needs. We're happy to do small sessions repeatedly throughout the day or one big session with loads of people. It's entirely up to yourselves. The hotline there, the 0300 number, is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If anyone has any immediate concerns about a client and their vulnerability, website there, which has live chat Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 as well. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to take them, or please do just get in touch after the call. And if anyone's from Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland, if you get in touch with me, I will happily pass you on to the relevant people.
Thank you so much, Cath. As always, it's so eye-opening whenever I've seen you do one of these presentations. It's scary just how quickly somebody's life can just change. Like the example that you gave of the guy that had your phone number in one hand and pills in the other is just shocking. That's how far someone can be sort of persuaded to go to take their own life because of what's going on without actually finding out they've got the relevant help. There's a couple of comments really in the chat at the moment. One from Lynn Crawford saying that she loves the IMLT and thank you. She says she remembers watching a scenario played out with a theatre company that the IMLT put on several years ago. It had such an impact. When someone owes a friend, she asked about the friend and what they would do if they didn't pay them or missed a payment. And they look afraid when talking about that friend. And she's done the online shark thing that you mentioned, and she said it was really good.
I think friend of a friend is a really difficult one, isn't it? Because, you know, if we have like one way of getting messages to people and we say, don't use loan sharks. And people say, but I'm not, I'm borrowing from a friend. And say, report loan sharks, but I haven't got a loan shark, I borrowed from a friend. And it can take so long for someone to realise that what they've done isn't a loan shark. Like I say, particularly people who have other vulnerabilities around that and can be exploited in other ways by people. But I think that's one of the biggest challenges I think we've got going forward is the friend issue.
Yeah. All the comments are just saying how much that was a brilliant presentation, Cath. Elaine Wilkinson says that they love the IMLT in Manchester.
Hi, Elaine.
Bob says, Bob Willington from ALG, obviously, says superb as always, Cath. And then Susan Smith from Edinburgh, just a comment, excellent presentation, relatable, accessible, passionately presented, completely agree with all of this. Thank you. Yeah, again from Catherine Bennett at Enterprise, Helen Pettigrew. Oh, Chris Pettigrew's got a question. How long on average does it take to build a case and prosecute someone? Appreciate or depend on an individual basis?
It genuinely does. I mean, in terms of building a case, and because what we do when the information comes in, we assess all of that, and our aim is to get it to warrant. So when we get to warrant, we can go into the house, we can search houses, search cars, search business premises, look for evidence, and at that point they're arrested. That's the first time they know we're looking at them, hopefully. And from that point on is where we kind of build a case for court. In terms of from the initial intel coming into that warrant, it can be anything from 2 weeks to 9 months, because it depends very much on what that intelligence is in the first place. So we assess everything, and it will depend on things like the risk to the person. So if the risk is they're coming back at 4 o'clock on Friday to break your legs, that's very different from, you know, I'm going to tell your husband about it in a month if you don't pay me back. But we'll also look at the amount of evidence, the amount of details that we've got. So if we get anonymous intelligence, we will corroborate it the best way we can. But the best thing for us is a victim who's willing to go on the record and actually speak to us. And if we can use that, we can get banking statements potentially. We can look at police data on this person and build that picture up to get to warrant. But it's all all very fluid. So we can think we're going to be in Barrow this week, and then something comes in and we end up in Telford instead. It's all kind of a continual risk assessment, but it can take a sort of a big sort of different chunk of time. The issue we've got at the moment is from warrant to charge to court. So we're very lucky that we don't use the Crown Prosecution Service. We use our own internal solicitors to charge. So that process is quite streamlined. But at the moment, people we're arresting, we're being told will be in court in 2023. Because that is the availability of the criminal courts at the moment. I think Manchester the other day, we got told it'd be April 2023 before this case gets anywhere near Crown Court. So that's a challenge for us in terms of keeping people engaged for that length of time, obviously. There's nothing we can do anything about. It's because of COVID, it's because they were shut for so long. So that's the issue with prosecution. However, once the loan shark's been arrested, part of their bail conditions are you do not contact anyone that you have lent money to. And that tends to be adhered to, and if it isn't, they're remanded straight into custody because they've broken the bail conditions. So it stops relatively quickly, but the actual prosecution and the outcome of the prosecution can take a bit of time.
Brilliant. There's another question from Helen Mullen. Again, she says, thank you very much. Very scary and very relevant what's about to happen in my advice area. She wants to know if you've got any tips on how they can spot money laundering, loan sharks on bank statements at all.
Yes, I have a piece of paper which tells you exactly that. So things would be third-party transactions. So lots of money going out in lump sums, and then smaller amounts going back on a regular basis. That would be one, especially if those smaller amounts going back are for significantly more than the original lump sum that went out. Because obviously, you know, in the past, when I was a deprived student, my dad might have lent me some money for a car and I would have paid him back monthly, but that would have been for the amount that he lent me. And you'd have noticed there was a commonality in surname, etc., etc. If there are multiple people doing it, we also look for things like references where loan might be spelt wrong, L-O-N-E. We see that quite a lot. Repayment spelt wrong, debt. And also particular communities use different words. So paluwagan is a Filipino word that we see quite often when the Filipino community are engaged in illegal money lending, and that they often use bank transfer, so that comes up quite frequently. But we have a whole sheet of paper about things to look out for, so if you drop me a line, I will happily share it.
Brilliant. Does anybody else have any more questions at all for Cath, or before we move on? No? Okay, well, again, Cath, thank you so much. As I said earlier, it's just so eye-opening, and yeah, seeing those sort of real life scenarios really sort of makes it a reality, and sort of makes myself at the VRS appreciate just the sort of people that we're all about trying to help at the moment, and forevermore, hopefully. So if we want to move on, Lily, are you ready to go with your presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Heidi, if you'd like to start sharing for Lily. Lovely. So I'd like to introduce you guys to Lily Bhandal at Back to Credit. And if you'd like to carry on with your presentation, that would be brilliant.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Lily, I'm from Back to Credit. We run a small debt management company in Birmingham. And today I'm going to just be talking to you about vulnerability in debt. Can I have the next slide? Okay, so we have two main definitions of vulnerable customers that we deal with in debt management. We've got customers who are unable to, for whatever reason, make an informed decision at the time of dealing with us. And then we also have customers whose welfare, financial, mental, or physical, could be put at risk through choosing a service of a product through ourselves. So our current processes, I could. So we've got identify. So we obviously identify the customers. COVID has created an adversity for many people at the moment. At the same time, obviously a reduction in face-to-face and social contact has made it harder to identify when someone may be going through challenging times. So there's signs to look out for that we use within advisors, especially the debt advisors at Back to Credit. And some of the signs and triggers that may occur during a telephone call, video call, and meeting is customers saying that they can't pay, they're having trouble paying, they can't read the documentation, or they can't understand the letters that we've sent them. Other signs of vulnerabilities may include extreme moods, poor concentration, finding it hard to make a decision, and feeling overwhelmed by things, or being tearful or emotional on the phone. We then obviously go ahead and engage is our second process. So it's important for us to recognize that the indicators but feel comfortable to engage with the customer in that vulnerable situation. So there's not, I would say there's not one size that fits all approach. We've got tools and systems that can be used in a tailored and flexible way to help us listen, engage with sensitivity, respect and compassion towards the customer. We do affordability checks through income and expenditures and have obviously the use of open banking. Okay, we obviously then would follow through with the support that we offer the client. Our advisors play a key role in playing in the supporting of clients through the debt journey itself. We have various options to help people in the way that they can find most comfortable. People talk to us at the moment, especially in the debt industry, about all sorts of things, from seeking counselling to emotional issues such as anxiety, depression, to wanting practical help with managing of their household finances. So we offer a range of communication tools to support to our customers with the systems that we've got currently in place. We've got automated systems in place, and then we've also got help that the visually impaired by providing documentation in large print, braille and audio. The hard of hearing, we've got deaf and speech impaired can communicate with us through the Rely UK app. Other services that we've got available are those for people that are struggling with where English isn't their first language, who's got issues with literacy, numeracy, and for those we have obviously would like to authorize, and I think this has been touched on before, someone to speak on their behalf. So, you know, we've got letter of authorities in place that we can have conversations with the third parties that are involved. We've then got signposting, which at the moment, obviously, we have got customers where we may not be able to deal with them because we don't have the specialist advice in-house, and we would then go into our network and signpost them over to the organisations for free advice, which include Age UK, Alzheimer's Society, Citizens Advice Bureau, Mind, Money Advice Trust and Samaritans. Okay. Heidi, if I could have next slide. Okay. Then we've got at the moment, obviously with COVID, we've got the current climate and vulnerability and how it's impacting obviously businesses. So the lockdown measures and restrictions have halted economy activity in certain sectors and harshly disrupted others. We've got an increased uncertainty and obviously risk of unemployment, which is having a major impact. We've got government measures to protect employees and businesses. So obviously we've got the furlough scheme, which has obviously now come to an end as well. We've got regulators that have increased demands on creditors to support borrowing and new guidance and legislation for hardship support, and obviously the forbearance. And we've got people with reduced household income that is coming to an end of their holiday payments, which obviously is causing a lot of vulnerability for customers previously probably were never in the situation. And then we've got businesses that we feel that are not fully equipped at the moment to deal with the sharp spikes in the customer demand and support that's needed for the customers. So what does this mean? It means more customers need help. There's also new types of customers that need help. So we've seen an increase currently in self-employed customers that, you know, we're not having any financial difficulties, but obviously with the COVID now, they've, you know, their businesses have come to a stop, or they don't have the income that they once had before, but they've still got the expenditures going out. We've got an increased need to be able to identify vulnerable customers, and I think, as we've just touched on the previous conversation with Cath, we've got obviously a lot of fraud happening as well. We've got more debts and delayed repayments because people can't afford to pay their debts back, and we've got more pressure on staff and systems and an increase in capital requirement from companies. Now, what can be done? So obviously we need to be able to define forbearance and payment options that are available to customers. We need to be able to identify the type of vulnerabilities, and this can be through systems, rapport building with customers. We also need to be able to incorporate breathing space, which is obviously a government scheme that's come on board for the short term. It's not something that's long term, and as Helen said before, there is a need for long-term solutions for the customers, not just the short-term solutions, but at least there is something there available for customers. We conduct an in-depth income and expenditure assessments, which are needed if you're looking at affordability for clients, especially if you've got clients that are struggling with their finances. I think there's a need to obviously adopt new technology to automate decisions, because not all clients feel comfortable speaking to advisors straight away, and obviously with, you know, they prefer to have that conversation or do it themselves online and then have that human interaction. And then also is to get MI in place to monitor risk and performances. So currently we use, to be in our business itself, we use an automated process called DebtSense. Heidi, if I could have the next slide. So we've got an automated advice system. So DebtSense for us is a digital platform designed to automate payment plans, collection strategies. It's where consumers can actually go on to a platform without having to speak to an advisor straight away and actually look at their needs, their income and expenditure, use open banking to check their affordability. It manages full end-to-end customer journey workflow and incorporates vulnerable checks. It obviously, like I said, it has got the income and expenditure built into it, and it's got something where you can always have a human interaction and you can always speak to an advisor, which is needed to obviously build a rapport, but we feel that consumers do want to go and use an online platform in their own time and space. This platform obviously provides rules engines that allow customers to choose their own repayment options and their own solutions, so at the comfort of their home without being pressurized. They can actually have a look at all the solutions that are available to them, and they can then choose one that is applicable to them, or one that they may want to go and discuss in depth with another advisor, rather than having to, you know, speak to an advisor and almost be, I would say, kind of pressurized to say this is your best solution or this is your best solution. They can do this in the comfort of their own home. As far as I can see it, in terms of obviously vulnerability at the moment, I think I don't believe there's a checklist or specific criteria to decide if a customer is vulnerable. I think we all go through difficult times, and it's important to be aware of the ever-changing world and demands and pressures that anyone can face themselves under at any point in their lives, and in which they may require additional support. And that's it from me. Quite short and sweet there.
Absolutely fine. And we did have a couple of polls, Lily, which people have been answering. So the first poll, if anybody's not shared the answer, oh no, it's been shared now. So from the first poll, do you have systems in place to support clients that are struggling with their debts? 88% of the people that answered said yes. So I think that's pretty good.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay. Heidi, did you want to share the second poll? Thank you. If you want to answer the poll that's on your screen now, we'll read through that as soon as we've got answers from the vast majority of people. So the question is, have you got automated systems in place for dealing with vulnerable customers? At the moment, it's looking that the no's are winning.
Sorry, what do you mean by automated systems in place? What does that mean?
So, sorry, I can't get off the screen. So automated systems have you got the processes in place within your own systems built in, where clients can, like I said, for example, we've got a DebtSense journey where clients can put their vulnerabilities, they can check their vulnerabilities. So have you got that in place for your clients to be able to do that? Right.
So it's about process rather than some digital, format.
Yeah.
Right, because it seems okay.
Right, okay, we've got 100% answered now. So if you want to share that, Heidi. So yeah, so the vast majority, we've got 65% have said no to that question, followed by 28% that said yes. Is any of that a surprise at all, Lily?
Yes, I think I was under the impression that more people would have had automated systems. So that's quite interesting, and obviously it'd probably be something to follow up through.
Yeah, no problem at all. Okay. So if we wanted to go ahead, has anybody got any questions for Lily? If you wanted to raise a virtual hand or pop a message in the chat. got anything you'd like to ask Lily at all? Or just speak up. You're more than welcome to speak if you've got a question for Lily.
Lily, thanks for that presentation. I mean, one I saw myself, maybe it's more of a comment. I was quite surprised that some of my clients ran into debt that they had. I mean, much needless, because they had this invitation to be offered payment break.
Yeah.
Now, before then, they never defaulted, but it just felt really good to not pay for like 6 months. So it was quite palatable for them, but they never understood the implication going forward, that they would have to pay much more than they would normally pay.
Yeah.
So after the holiday was over, reality kicked in, and I was surprised that they said they didn't know that would happen. So it left me wondering whether it was actually explained to them properly or even explained at all. You know, because everyone just saw COVID.
I agree with you. And I think that's what happened during COVID. I think when all these payment holidays were offered, all these forbearances were offered through lenders, a lot of customers were like, oh, okay, this is brilliant. You know, we're gonna put a pause on our car payment, for example, on our mortgages, etc. And I think you're right. I don't think the advice was properly there to advise them that you are going to have to pay this back. It's not just the holiday that you're going to get, and you're not going to get any interest or charges at the back of it. And I just think, I agree with you. I think that was something that the companies should have been making consumers aware of at the time, that these are just payment holidays. They still need to be paid, and you are still going to get charged the additional. The companies are still going to charge you a percentage of paying them late, and that would increase your payments, because you're right, after 6 months, your payments would increase and you'll be paying that percentage back on a monthly basis. And we did, as a business, we found that was a lot of, even during the whole of COVID, obviously staff here were working, and it was a lot of educating customers to advise them that, look, if you're not struggling, there's no point of you taking a payment holiday. The payment holiday is there to take if you're actually struggling, because otherwise, if you're taking it, you're going to be struggling at a later stage because you're going to be paying more back. And I think that's, that was just, I would say that was that dominoes effect that we had throughout COVID. And it was a lot of consumers. Some were actually genuinely struggling and needed the payment holiday, but others didn't need it at all. And it was just a case of they just wanted to have that extra cash there. But it should have been, I agree with you, it should have, from our point of view, what we found is that it should have been signposted a lot better, and there should have been a lot more education around what this payment holiday means for consumers, because we are finding now that furloughs ended, forbearance is coming to an end at the end of this month, you will find that, consumers will be struggling, and there will be obviously, vulnerable customers out there that suddenly are going to get these, payment holidays stopped and the increased payments, which they are going to have to at that point pay back.
Yeah, I think that's the case, because we don't give financial advice, so we deal with debt. But I was caught in between giving financial advice and debt advice to one of my clients, because the client actually called me to say, Ernest, I'm looking to go for payment holiday, and I want you to negotiate that for me. So the first question I asked him was, why do you need a payment holiday? He said, yeah, because of COVID. I say, yeah, there's COVID, but from your track record, I think you're paying well. We've done a financial statement in the past. You've been making payments for almost a year now. Have you been struggling with that? And he said, no, I just got this invitation to accept this. And I said, no. But then I was a bit worried, because I felt I was giving financial advice, because that would mean So I spoke to my manager, I can't remember at the time. And he said, we can't tell clients what to do with their money, but at least I could mention it. So I did mention it, and the client changed his mind. Yeah. You see? So, and now he's happy. And so I just felt there was need for some system in place to actually educate people, because I just felt, even though the client wouldn't strike as someone who was vulnerable, just by not understanding the nature of that transaction in the future, I just felt that was some degree of vulnerability.
I think there needs to be, within businesses that aren't there to offer debt advice, aren't obviously regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority to do so. I think there should be processes within businesses there to be able to make those referrals and make sure that they have got, they're partnered up with companies that can offer that advice, so that, for example, the situation that you were in, you could then say, okay, actually, do you know what, I can refer you over to someone that can help you and give you some free advice, and then you can take, and it's up to the obviously consumer to take that decision. And that's where I was saying to you, we've obviously got that human interaction where people can get advice from us by ringing in our debt advisors here, or we have introduced an online portal where you can just refer them to the online portal and they can kind of assess themselves, and they can then go through everything themselves without being, without being kind of forced into a decision. They are then just reading up about their options and what's available to them.
Great, thank you so much, Lily. We've got a couple of questions that have come up in the chat. What automated systems would you recommend?
So at the moment, as I said, we work with LIAISE, and that's the systems that we're currently using. We are using the DebtSense platform, which is an automated online customer platform which businesses can use within their own businesses. It can be actually integrated to any business, and then have their, they can have their own logos and things like that onto it, or it can just be something that businesses can link onto to refer their clients over for that, that free advice. And they've got their options available to all debt solutions. They've got availability to use open banking. They've also got obviously the income and expenditure that they can actually use through this journey.
Lovely. While we're on the automated system, somebody's Helen Mullen has asked, does your debt automated system point the client to independent money or debt advice?
It gives you so it points you through to either obviously independents and free debt charities. So it gives you an option of everything that's available to you.
Okay, another one from Claire Sheed. Have you found that people are beginning to be able to put debt into the correct priority, like food, rent, fuels, etc.?
Yes, through income and expenditure, definitely so, because obviously we obviously, you've got your main income and expenditure that advisors are going through, but then you've also got that rapport building and that in-depth to make sure that customers know how much they should be spending on their, for example, their housekeeping. A customer may say, oh well, I'm only spending £50 because they're going out there trying to look for a loan, trying to get more money, so they're thinking, oh well, if we actually budget this to a lower amount, we're going to be able to get more money out. And it's almost, like I said, it's educating customers that they don't need another loan. They need to try and sort out the finances that they've got and budget them and make sure that they've got enough to live by, and then whatever's left over, they can then negotiate that with their creditors and pay that back towards their creditors, rather than struggling on a monthly basis.
So a comment from another Claire, but from Claire Sheed. Utilities wise, we saw a lot of people not even communicate direct debit cancellations, and they went through the roof. And then some people could not understand that they had a balance outstanding and a balance for current consumption. They did a blanket via letters and email options prior, but the uptake was not even 1%. So it's just a comment from her organisation and how they've sort of felt. Helen Mullen has said, the accessibility of buy now and pay later will become more of an issue, especially around Christmas time.
Definitely.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any more questions at all for Lily? Oh, there's one more that's just come down the bottom. What level of vulnerability disclosure have you experienced through DebtSense, and have you experienced more disclosure through this platform than other channels?
Yes, I would say so. We have, I mean, obviously the best channel is always going to be to have that, pick up the phone and actually have that rapport building conversation, because you're only going to find through rapport building, through obviously speaking to the customers, when you're going to actually be able to find out what their individual needs are, whether it be debt solutions, whether it be obviously referring to the signposting them to the relevant agencies. But we are finding that customers are starting to use automated platforms, where they can, in the comfort of their own home, without being judged, be able to put in their vulnerabilities at that point, and then having that discussion later on, so that when they're picking up the phone to the agents, picking up the phone to ring that particular customer, they're already aware of the vulnerabilities, and they're not having to repeat themselves and go through something that maybe they don't really want to talk about.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Lily. Does anybody else have any more questions for Lily or for any of the other speakers that we had today? Rob's had to leave, but Helen and Cath and Lily are all still on the call today. If anybody else had any burning questions that they didn't manage to get in earlier, you want to raise your hand or put in the chat, I'm happy to read out. No?
I've got one for Cath.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, she's there. Cath, you were saying about debt advisors, obviously, you know, they're not asking about the loan sharks or legal activities when they're obviously ringing through. Is there any, what would you suggest? I mean, obviously, mostly what I experience is debt advisors do ask them, you know, through open banking, here's the creditors that we've got. Have you got any other creditors that you're dealing with? Is there any other way that we could approach that questioning?
I think there's two things. There's one which is explicitly saying, have you borrowed from someone who might be a loan shark?
Yeah.
But I think also if someone said, yes, I owe my friend some money,
Yeah.
it's what you do with that information. And it's maybe the follow-up question of, does your friend, do you know how much you owe your friend? Are they charging you interest? What happens if you don't pay? Are they lending lots of people money?
Yeah.
That would make me wonder if it was a friend or not. So I think there's those two strands. There's the kind of explicit loan shark question. There's the probing questions about friend debt.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think the probing questions probably would work better because when you do ask them, I guess directly, they're going to say no. And like I said, the problem we get sometimes is customers are thinking, oh well, it's not debt management. We want to try and get a loan to clear off our debts. So they will kind of withhold information to kind of think that if they withhold all this information, they're going to be able to get this loan. So it is kind of like you said, asking those questions. So that's quite interesting.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. Any other questions at all before I sum up? No? Okay, that's absolutely fine. So thank you all so much for attending to today's session. So we've had, just to sum up, today's presentation from Helen from the Vulnerability Registration Service on organisations partnering with the VRS and the customer vulnerability experience. Rob Bell, obviously speaking about explicit consent not being the only option when it comes to GDPR and how it doesn't stop organisations from sharing data to organisations such as the Vulnerability Registration Service. Cath Wohlers, a brilliant presentation on the real examples of victims made vulnerable by loan sharks and how the VRS is working towards helping them with their messaging. And then, of course, Lily, thank you so much, last but by no means least, on supporting clients with their debts and supporting those who are vulnerable as a result of their debt. In the chat, we've had a bit of a plug from Mark Bailey for his event that he's going on next week, which I promised that I would mention to you guys. So the link is in the chat, which I will share with you guys later on. So yeah, just wanted to say thank you very much for a thoroughly engaging session. Helen, did you have anything else that you wanted to sort of say?
No, just thank you all. Thanks for all the speakers and thanks for all joining us. Really appreciate it.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you guys on the next session that we have once we've got dates for that. I will be sharing the presentations from today in an email with you guys, and we'll also be putting the recording up on YouTube, which I will send you guys a link for, so you can share amongst your organisations. Please feel free to share amongst whoever wants to have a look at that. If anybody has got any questions about the Vulnerability Registration Service, joining it, or any questions about how we operate, please do feel free to reach out to me. You've all got my email address. And thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Thanks, Kirsty. Thanks, everyone.